Hello to all. It's good to see you again. I hope you are hanging in there. There's a lot of information coming your way. So, we are going to take a little shift in direction here and talk about in interpreting and reporting our findings. We have gone over data models, Excel spreadsheets, formulas, functions, formatting, creating those data dashboards, key performance indicators. Now what we want to do is look at how do we interpret and report these findings. So we are going to go ahead and shift on over to a couple of slides here. We're going to overview interpreting, reporting our findings, and then we're even going to jump into a dashboard, lesson 2, to walk through this process now. So it's all starting to come together. We've worked with our data models, we've cleaned our data, we've formatted our data, we've performed complex formulas and functions. This should all be sounding very repetitive, but it's supposed to be repetitive because this is the process that you need to start developing. So interpret and report findings. The outcomes that we're going to go over for today, we want to identify the business objective and the problem to your model, detect the types of questions that need to be solved using the data and your dashboard, create the blueprint to find the answer to the question. And I say blueprint with emphasis because eventually this has to be presented. These findings have to be communicated somehow. So we want to start to develop that blueprint, that outline, to start figuring out how are we going to structure all of these findings once we actually have outcomes. Because we do it this way, it's going to help your audience understand by giving them that overview and the surface level of the countless hours that you've spent going through this analysis. It will also help you define and summarize your key points. There are a lot of successful ways to report your findings, but the main ones we're going to go over are interpretation. Create an outline of your talking points. That's your blueprint. We want you to get comfortable in interpreting your findings. As analysts, sometimes we have that disconnect from running the analysis and then being able to interpret our findings. You're going to communicate across multiple different types of audiences, but you want to go in to every presentation with the assumption that your audience is not an expert. So we need to start creating that outline. We need to make sense of that raw data so we can successfully report it and interpret it to where your audience understands. We do this through identifying the main talking points. Another way to say main talking points is key performance indicators. I know we hear those words a lot together, but there's a reason behind them because they help you explain how the analysis served the purpose to the business objective. To communicate our findings, we want to be clear, we want to be logical, relevant, and credible. Again, this is all coming full circle. We want our data to be credible, we want it to be relevant, and we want to be able to report that clearly and logically. We now, at this stage, need to draft the analysis. So now that you've run it, it's time to report what you have found. As the analyst, you go through so many different steps, a lot of processes to get here. So now you want to be able to report what you found, and you're going to start to create a storyboard. A way to think of your storyboard is an outline, an old school way of writing, a piece of paper or a Word document. Start to outline your talking points. Your introduction, in this case, is going to be your business objective. What is the body of your presentation going to hold? It's going to be your baseline metrics. Within the metrics, how did your data align to the business objective? Did it miss the mark? Are they right on track? What were those key findings, and what visuals are you going to be using to best support your story? We have talked about the ability to effectively communicate. We have talked about getting creative. This is where that's going to start coming in now. When you draft your analysis in your blueprint, this is where you can start putting your stamp on things and getting creative. Ways to phrase your narrative would be, we have our findings. You and I as analysts know what that means, but your audience isn't going to understand the complex functions that you put forth to draw these conclusions. They're not going to understand, nor do we need to worry them with the countless hours that you spent putting this all together. So these are some phrases that are very helpful when communicating and interpreting your findings. The first one, based on the analysis, key findings were, and then dive into how the findings supported or didn't support the business objective they presented you with. You can also start with, when comparing the baseline or comparing to baseline measurements and metrics, analysis showed, and then go into those findings. Another way to phrase this, after running the analysis, you will see that, and support your statement with analytical findings through the analysis that you ran. You'll see a couple of these phrases sound very, very similar, but we need to know who is your audience. What will best cater to them? And these phrases will help guide you. Again, this is your blueprint. This is your model. This is your project. These are just some suggestions that you can use to help guide you there. So what we're actually going to do now is jump in to how to interpret these findings. We talked about phrases that we could use. How does this support the business objective? And so on. So you'll see right down here, okay, there is a business objective. What are the company costs going? And that should be going to be, or business objective. Where are the company costs going? Okay, so this is actually a very good example of when to ask the question. My interpretation of this would be, their business objective is, for the summary metrics over here, they want to know, where are the company costs going? We can assume that they want to know, are they being allocated over here across the summary metrics? Do they want to look at acquisition costs? So these are very good guidance for you to start asking these questions. But for now, what we are going to do is assume that the business objective is they want to know where the company costs are going across summary metrics. Okay, so this is a predisposed dashboard for customer profitability analysis, and you'll see that up here. Over here to the right, I have included an interpret findings baselines. It's just a guide. These are the phrases that we went over. So this will help us interpret this dashboard over here. So let's take a quick moment and come down here to the summary metrics per segment. This is their business objective. This is what they want us to focus on. As analysts, we know we are going to spend time and go through all of the data. We're going to sift through it all. We're going to wrangle through all of it. But for now, we're focusing just on the business objective for the interpretation part of this. You can see the summary metrics per segment hold average cost per acquired customer, average marketing cost per active customer, average cost per terminated customer, and average profit loss per customer. Let's take a second here to evaluate this. We know, after everything that we're starting to pull together here, these summary metrics are based on categories. So these categories are the different types of customers. So that should spark us to let us know we are going to want a visual like the one you see here. We want a visual graph or chart that is going to best support category findings. So in this case, we decided to go with a sidebar chart with data labels. Again, this should all start to be familiar to you, but now we're putting all of the pieces together here. So, business objective. Where are the company costs going? Here are our categories. From here, we created a dashboard. And this dashboard shows the average cost per acquired customer broken down by each week. You can see here the columns. We have week 1, week 2, and week 3. We can also identify that with our legend down here at the bottom right. This is a good learning experience as well for you. You're not familiar with the data that I sifted through. You don't know the countless hours that I went through to run this analysis to generate these results. But the intent is to be able to effectively communicate the findings clearly, logically, based on the interpretation. So in our chart here, we can see that each week, we can see that in our legend on the bottom right, has been broken down by each category, or in this case, summary metric. We are looking at average cost per acquired customer, average marketing cost per active customer, average cost per terminated customer, and average profit or loss per customer. So up here, I'm going to direct your attention to the interpret findings box. This data needs to be communicated to the requester. And these should look familiar. These are the phrases that we just went over. So take a second to let these phrases kind of marinate. Based on the analysis, key findings were: when comparing to baseline metrics, after running the analysis, you will see that, and based on the findings, it is recommended that. In just those 4 phrases, I will be identifying what their business objective was and how the analysis either supports it or not. I have given them information on their baseline metrics. This is something they may not have known before. I'm also wrapping things up and letting them know what my recommendations are going to be after running the analysis, and then create them a conclusion. Give them our thoughts, give them our feedback, and allow them to draw decisions based off of our insights. So to the very first interpret finding phrase here, based on the analysis, key findings were. We will be able to draw all of these conclusions just by looking at this dashboard. We know that week 3 across the board is where the money or the cost goes across all categories. So based on the analysis, key findings were that in week 3 is where the cost across all customer types went. And that's just being able to look at that visual, draw that actionable insight just by looking at the chart, and we can do that here. But now we're interpreting these findings. The second one, when comparing to baseline metrics. When comparing to the baseline, we can see that week 2 was where the lesser amount of company costs was going across all customer categories. After running the analysis, we will see that week 1 isn't the best and it isn't the lowest across cost per customer category. So here we are letting our requester know the breakdown of costs. The customer knows where the cost is going, not only by customer category, but also by that of week. And then lastly, we can let them know, based on the findings, we recommend that we look at week 3. Why is week 3 so much higher across all customer categories? So us as analysts, our recommendation is to let them know to look at these acquisition costs. What is that customer activity? And that will allow for a lot of follow-up question for the leftover data that is over here on the left. By giving them the recommendations based off of the analysis, what we are doing is we are creating follow-up questions, which lead to additional reports or further analysis. Again, we want to be able to interpret the key findings effectively to our audience, and we were just able to do that with our dashboard. Okay, so to circle things around, we started with our raw data, that Excel spreadsheet that we sifted through, spent again countless hours working on. It doesn't show here. We don't want it to show here as analysts. We want not only our storyboard to help guide us, that blueprint. What is the business objective? What is the supporting key findings? And based off of that, how can we clearly interpret those findings to our audience? Again, as much as this is a lot of information, I do this a lot. I encourage you to go back to previously sifted through analysis. The analysis is always there. It is always working. The data can always be fine-tuned. There are more stories to tell. Go back to these data dashboards that you have created. Start to identify those key performance indicators, and now look at your dashboard with a different lens. Look at your dashboard with an interpretation lens. Start to think, is this a healthy blueprint for my audience? Am I going to be able to logically communicate my findings? Am I going to be able to clearly interpret my findings to support the business objective? So take some time, go back through analysis that you've ran, start to identify these key findings and create that storyboard. Do not be afraid to ask questions, write them down, start that open follow-up. We want you to start identifying that process for yourself and what it's going to look like. Take time, take a few minutes, walk away, take a deep breath. You're doing a great job. This is a lot. Formulating that process as an analyst, it gets very heavy. There is a lot that goes into it. So take your time with it. You're doing great. Any questions, never hesitate to ask. Have a good one.